Let's take another close look at the 1572 map of Istanbul. One striking detail is that it depicts only one large mosque, aside from Hagia Sophia. This mosque is slightly smaller than Hagia Sophia in size, but it occupies more space on the map, as it is drawn surrounded by numerous buildings covered with rows of small domes. The entire complex is enclosed by a wall. In front of the mosque stand two large minarets. The identity of this mosque will be discussed later. For now, what matters is that the 1572 map shows a single mosque equipped with minarets, meaning it was the only imperial mosque in all of Istanbul at that time. And this was in 1572. Every single imperial mosque in Istanbul is known to have tall minarets. The 1572 map also features a few smaller mosques, buildings topped with crescents. However, all of them are small and lack minarets. In fact, even such small mosques are surprisingly few in number, only a handful can be seen. But how can this be? Historians assure us that long before 1572, Istanbul was already home to many grand mosques with minarets. The most famous among them are those built by the renowned imperial architect Mimar Sinan, a contemporary of Suleiman the Magnificent. Sinan's massive mosques still stand in Istanbul today, surrounded by crowds of odd tourists. So, where are they on the 1572 map? It is worth noting that this map was created long after Suleiman's reign, as both he and his successors are depicted on it. Therefore, the grand mosques of Suleiman's era should also be shown, not just one, but several. Yet, apart from possibly a single mosque, they are absent. Let's list some of the major mosques of Istanbul that according to the conventional history of Turkey should have appeared on the 1572 map. The massive Süleymaniye Mosque, with its 4 minarets, was supposedly built between 1550 and 1557. Even today, it remains the tallest and, along with its annexes, the most imposing mosque in Istanbul. And it was allegedly constructed long before the 1572 map was created. But where is it on the map? It is nowhere to be found. The mosque depicted on the map cannot be the Süleymaniye Mosque for several reasons. First, it has 2 minarets, whereas the Süleymaniye Mosque has 4. Second, the mosque on the map is shown as smaller than Hagia Sophia, while the Süleymaniye Mosque is significantly larger than Hagia Sophia. Finally, the location of the mosque on the map is completely different. The Süleymaniye Mosque is situated much closer to the mouth of the Golden Horn and to Hagia Sophia. The mosque on the map, however, is drawn near the Orthodox Patriarchate and relatively close to the walls of the city, an entirely different part of Istanbul. The massive Bayezid Mosque, with its 2 minarets, was supposedly built as early as the 15th century, between 1497 and 1505, 70 years before the map was made. Yet, it is also missing from the map. The Bayezid Mosque is located much closer to Hagia Sophia than the mosque depicted on the 1572 map. The Fatih Mosque, also with 2 minarets, is the largest mosque in Istanbul in terms of area. It was supposedly built between 1463 and 1470, 100 years before the map was created. The mosque was later rebuilt. However, this mosque is also absent from the map. The Fatih Mosque looks nothing like the mosque depicted on the map and is located in a completely different part of Istanbul, much closer to Hagia Sophia. The Shahzadeh Mosque, also with 2 minarets, was supposedly built in Istanbul between 1544 and 1548, 25 to 30 years before the map was drawn. This mosque stands near the Süleymaniye Mosque and therefore does not match the mosque on the map in terms of location. The Mirima Sultan Mosque, with a single minaret, was supposedly built in 1555 by the architect Sinan. According to travel guides, in 1894, it was severely damaged by an earthquake but was later restored twice, in 1910 and 1958. This is also a very large mosque, but it does not match the one shown on the 1572 map. Firstly, it has only one minaret, while the mosque on the map has two. Secondly, it is situated at the very edge of the city near the city walls, whereas the mosque on the map is located much farther from the city walls. The Yavuz Selim Mosque is believed to have been built between 1520 and 1522 by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who named it after his father, Yavuz Selim. The mosque has a square base, measuring 25 by 25 meters, and a small dome. Each wing is covered by 9 domes. In the courtyard, 18 columns support 22 domes. There are other mosques in Istanbul that were supposedly built before 1572. Only the largest and most well-known ones have been listed here. The great Ottoman architect Sinan, who allegedly lived from 1490 to 1588, is said to have built 80 large and 50 small mosques during his lifetime, many of which are in Istanbul. So, which mosque is depicted on the map? The answer is unexpected. It is the Yavuz Selim Mosque. The appearance and location of the Yavuz Selim Mosque completely match the illustration on the 1572 map. Just as shown on the map, the mosque is situated very close to the Orthodox Patriarchate, in the Fener district of Istanbul. Nearby is also the Church of Mary of the Mongols, which was discussed extensively in the previous video. This is an old Christian district of Istanbul. Is it not strange that the first imperial mosque was built right there? An old photograph taken from the opposite shore of the Golden Horn labels the most prominent mosques in the city skyline. According to historians, all of these mosques were supposedly built before 1572. The approximate location of the mosque depicted on the 1572 map is also marked on the photograph. It is clear that, among the surviving large mosques, the only one that could correspond to it is the Yavuz Selim Mosque. Today, the Yavuz Selim Mosque is little known. It is difficult to find detailed information about it in books on Istanbul, so we turn to the online encyclopedia Wikipedia, which states, "The Yavuz Selim Mosque is an Ottoman imperial mosque located at the top of the 5th hill of Istanbul, Turkey, overlooking the Golden Horn. Its size and geographic position make it a familiar landmark on the Istanbul skyline. The Yavuz Selim Mosque is the second oldest extant imperial mosque in Istanbul. It was commissioned by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and completed in 1522, although an inscription in Arabic over the entrance portal indicates that it may have been in use a couple of years earlier. The architect is unknown. Numerous attempts have been made to associate the structure with the famous imperial architect Mimar Sinan, but there is no supporting documentary evidence, and the date of the mosque is too old. The mosque itself is decorated with very early examples of Iznik tiles. The mosque is flanked by twin minarets. The interior plan of the mosque is a simple square room, 24.5 meters on each side, covered by a shallow dome 32.5 meters in height. As with the Hagia Sophia, the dome is much shallower than a full hemisphere. So, the Yavuz Selim Mosque is considered the second oldest imperial mosque in Istanbul. However, as we are beginning to understand, it is likely the oldest large mosque in the city. No wonder, information about it is extremely scarce. The name of the architect who built it is unknown. The exact year of construction is also uncertain or questionable. But for a truly old mosque, that is to be expected. On the other hand, when it comes to later remakes that have been artificially dated further into the past, historians usually have precise details about their construction, and the corresponding documents are conveniently discovered in archives. In reality, all these records are often fabricated alongside the modern structures themselves. Now, let's draw a conclusion. Among all the large imperial mosques in Istanbul, only one is depicted on the 1572 map. Most likely, that is Yavuz Selim Mosque, believed to have been built around 1520. Until 1572, the Yavuz Selim Mosque remained the only large mosque in Istanbul, apart from Hagia Sophia. All other major mosques in Istanbul, supposedly built in the 15th–16th centuries, actually appeared much later. Needless to say, these conclusions strongly contradict the commonly accepted version of Turkish history. However, these findings follow directly from authentic historical documents. And facts are stubborn things. According to historians, a whole series of massive imperial mosques had supposedly been erected in Istanbul by the 15th–16th centuries, defining the city's skyline to this day. Almost all of them are attributed to the famous Sinan, the chief architect of Suleiman the Magnificent. However, the 1572 map tells a different story. It shows only a single large mosque in all of Istanbul. Where are the many mosques attributed to Sinan? They are simply not there. This immediately suggests that the conventional dating of several of Istanbul's largest mosques, believed to have been built in the 15th–16th centuries, is incorrect. Specifically, the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul was by no means built in 1550 to 1557, as is commonly believed, but no earlier than the 17th century. More likely, it was constructed in the 18th–19th centuries, as it would make sense that the most majestic mosque in Istanbul was one of the later additions. And indeed, there is clear evidence of a much later construction date for the Süleymaniye Mosque. Historical records state that its central dome was decorated in the 19th century by the Fatih brothers in the Ottoman Baroque style. Could it really be that this massive mosque stood for nearly 3 centuries with an undecorated central dome, waiting for the Fatih brothers to eventually come and paint it? Normally, dome decoration is completed immediately after the construction of a church or mosque. Therefore, the decoration of the Süleymaniye Mosque's dome in the 19th century indirectly dates its construction to the same century, the Fatih era. In the books Biblical Russia and Forgotten Jerusalem, the authors of the New Chronology have already argued that Suleiman the Magnificent did not build the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul but instead built Hagia Sophia. The Süleymaniye Mosque was constructed much later and was posthumously attributed to Suleiman. These books also provide detailed accounts of the Fatih brothers' supposed restoration of Hagia Sophia in the 19th century. The crudely altered names and faces in the mosaics of Hagia Sophia are most likely part of their cover-up effort. Now we are faced with yet another striking confirmation of the validity of these conclusions. It turns out that the massive Bayezid Mosque in Istanbul was also built much later than commonly believed. Historians think it was constructed between 1497 and 1505, but in reality, it was not built before the 17th century. A mosque as large as Bayezid Mosque would hardly have been overlooked on a map. Since it is absent, it is likely that it simply had not been built yet. Or perhaps there was a much smaller mosque in its place at the time, one deemed too insignificant to be included on the map. Again, just like with the Süleymaniye Mosque, there is clear evidence of Bayezid Mosque's later construction. Let's examine when its finishing touches were completed. It turns out this happened in the 17th century. In the courtyard stand 20 ancient columns supporting 24 domes. In the center is an ablution fountain, built in the 17th century. Of course, the construction of a fountain 150 years after the mosque itself does not on its own prove anything. But the absence of Bayezid Mosque on the 1572 map directly suggests that it was built later than the map was drawn. The most likely scenario is that it was constructed around the same time as the fountain, in the 17th century. Now let's turn to the Fatih Mosque. It is one of the most famous mosques in Istanbul and the largest in terms of occupied land area. It is believed that Fatih Mosque was built on the site of the Church of the Holy Apostles between 1463 and 1470, meaning immediately after the conquest of Constantinople, Istanbul in 1453. However, in reality, the present-day Fatih Mosque is not the same building that Mehmed the Conqueror had built in the 15th century. According to reports, it was destroyed during an earthquake and rebuilt between 1767 and 1771 by architect Mehmed Tahir in the Baroque style. Thus, the current mosque was constructed between 1767 and 1771, not in the 15th century. Reading Istanbul travel guides, one might get the impression that the original, old Fatih Mosque, destroyed in an earthquake, no longer exists. Additionally, it is subconsciously implied that it was roughly the same size as the new, reconstructed one. That's what any reader of a guidebook would assume. But that is not the case. The guidebook is misleading. The old Fatih Mosque still stands, right next to the new mosque. It is a relatively small building, resembling a Christian church. Could this actually be the ancient Church of the Holy Apostles, on whose site Mehmed the Conqueror supposedly built his mosque? Perhaps Mehmed did not demolish it at all but instead prayed there himself. By the late 20th century, the old Fatih Mosque, or church, was severely cracked and literally falling apart. It remained standing only because it was held together by iron bands wrapped around it. As a result, Istanbul authorities decided to restore the old mosque. Restoration work began, and this is a photograph of the old Fatih Mosque taken by the authors of the new Chronology in 1996, when restoration had just begun. A large sign in Turkish was displayed on the building, clearly stating that this small, half-ruined structure was indeed the Fatih Mosque. Istanbul. Fatih Mosque. Restoration. 1992–94. Thus, the true nature of the original Fatih Mosque was uncovered. And once again, it becomes clear how little historians are interested in genuine historical monuments. They are far more comfortable with later reconstructions. The restoration of the old Fatih Mosque, which began in 1996, lasted with interruptions for more than 10 years. However, before long, the sign identifying it was quietly removed, probably to avoid confusing enthusiastic tourists who naively believe that Mehmed the Conqueror built the massive mosque next to it in the 15th century. In reality, that mosque was constructed 300 years after Mehmed. Today, the building houses the library of Sultan Mahmud I. There are no plaques or signs indicating that this is the original old mosque of Mehmed the Conqueror. Such signs used to be present, but they have all been removed. The silent implication is that the real Fatih Mosque is the one built between 1767 and 1771. That is the one everyone knows, the one shown to tourists. Meanwhile, the true old Fatih Mosque, modestly standing right beside it, is not mentioned in any travel guides, as if it does not exist. Now, let's move on to the next major mosque in Istanbul, the massive Shahzadeh Mosque, Mosque of the Prince. It, too, should have appeared on a late 16th century map if the conventional Istanbul's history were correct. But it is not there. The Shahzadeh Mosque is located near the Bayezid and Süleymaniye mosques. It is believed that it was built by Sinan at the order of Suleiman the Magnificent between 1544 and 1548 in honor of Prince Mehmed. The Shahzadeh Mosque was the first large mosque built in Istanbul by Sinan. It was constructed on a square foundation and bears many similarities to Byzantine churches. Let's pause for a moment. If even the very first large mosque built in Istanbul by the great Sinan, a mosque that still retained strong resemblances to Byzantine churches, is missing from a late 16th century map, then logically, Sinan himself could not have lived before the 17th century, if he existed at all. This means that all the major mosques of Istanbul attributed to him must have been built no earlier than the 17th century. How should this be understood? A brief explanation, according to the reconstruction of the New Chronology, is as follows. According to the New Chronology, Islam did not separate from Christianity in the 7th century, as historians believe, but rather in the late 16th to early 17th century. As a result, the traditions that eventually prevailed in modern Islam but were rejected in Orthodoxy, were still shared between the two faiths in the 15th and 16th centuries. These traditions existed not only in Istanbul but also in Orthodox Russia. Conversely, customs that are now considered purely Orthodox could have been dominant in 16th century Istanbul. For example, Sultan Suleiman built Hagia Sophia, a purely Orthodox church, in Istanbul in the mid-16th century. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Cathedral of Saint Basil was built in the late 16th century, decorated strictly according to Islamic artistic rules, with exclusively floral patterns. Another example is the Russian harems in Moscow, which were similar to Muslim harems and lasted until the mid-17th century. Yet another example is the use of the Arabic language in Russia until the 17th century. Inscriptions on Russian weapons, including royal arms, were almost exclusively in Arabic until the mid-17th century. Conversely, Ottoman sultans and their court used Church Slavonic in the 16th century. There is nothing surprising about this. According to the New Chronology, Orthodoxy and Islam had not yet fully diverged at that time. Their separation only began in the early 17th century.